So today it's our second to last presentation in the Home on the Range webinar series with the BC chapter of SRM. My name is Sarah Peters. I am one of the directors with the BC chapter, and today we've got Kristi Gordon presenting on testing targeted grazing for cattle to suppress spotted knapweed. And so before we get started here, I'm just going to give you a couple of tips for Zoom. So in the center bottom of your screen, you'll see there's a chat bar. And to the left, you have your mute button and your video button. And so we will accept questions and stuff at the chat at any time, but we'll address all those questions at the end, the last 10 minutes of our presentation today. So Kristi will be talking for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll have our time for questions. And so Kristi Gordon is a Master of Environmental Science student at Thompson Rivers University in Kamloops, BC. She also works for the Grasslands Conservation Council of BC as their outreach and education assistant. Her areas of interest include integrated weed management, disturbance ecology, and environmental education. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Kristi and she'll tell you all about it.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining me today. And thanks to Sarah for the introduction. Thanks to the BC chapter as well for inviting me to present today. So today I'll be speaking about my master's research, which tested the use of targeted cattle grazing to help suppress the invasive plant spotted knapweed. So I'll start with a brief outline of my presentation. I'll start with some background information on BC's grasslands and their importance. Then I'll narrow in on spotted knapweed, its biology, and the threats it poses. I'll transition to targeted grazing and my current master's research. And finally, I'll discuss some future directions for this research. Grasslands are an endangered ecosystem in BC. It's estimated that they cover less than 1% of the land base. However, they are of great importance. Grasslands provide many opportunities for recreation, foraging, wildlife viewing, and more. They're also home to over 30% of our at-risk plant and animal species, such as the burrowing owl, American badger, and blue gamma grass. Grasslands can even help mitigate the effects of climate change through the uptake and storage of atmospheric carbon. Healthy grasslands also promote the sustainability of BC's agriculture industries. So sound stewardship and rangeland management can encourage biological diversity, enhance forage production, improve wildlife habitat, and more. However, one of the greatest threats to grassland ecosystems is invasive plant species. If you're not familiar, invasive plants are introduced species that cause harm to their surroundings, whether it be their environment, to society, or to the economy. Most tend to fall within that combination of the three impacts. So in rangelands, we tend to see reduced forage values and less diverse plant communities as a result of their introduction. Many invasive plants can also exist within the seed bank for many years, making this a long-term problem once they have established. The treatment and removal of invasive plants is also very labor-intensive, and it can be very expensive, especially when you're working with large infestations. So one species in particular is spotted knapweed, and this is an invasive plant that poses a great threat to our grasslands in BC and to the agriculture industries here. So this plant has invaded over 2.9 million hectares of land in North America. It's a biennial to short-lived perennial species. One plant can produce up to 1,000 seeds annually, allowing them to form these dense monocultures once they have established. Knapweed is also believed to release allelopathic chemicals into the soil, which can inhibit the growth of native plant species. Unlike their graminoid or grass counterparts, like blue bunch wheatgrass, spotted knapweed lacks the extensive underground root structures. So instead, knapweed has a large taproot, which can access deeper soil water and nutrients and can reduce soil stability, leading to erosion. Research has shown that patches of spotted knapweed may also uptake greater soil nitrogen and carbon, therefore decreasing the availability of these elements for the native plants. So one of the biggest concerns with knapweed infestations in BC is the economic losses that come from that. So in 2004, an estimate concluded that BC ranchers they spent about $400,000 annually to account for forage losses from knapweed invasion. And this estimate didn't include the costs associated with mechanical or chemical removal. So that value has greatly increased, most likely with the spread of invasion, as well with inflation, being a 2004 estimate. So it's a little bit dated. Some knapweed populations have also shown a resistance to commercial herbicides. So a recent study in the Kootenays had found a population of knapweed that could withstand applications of clopyralid 32 times greater, rates 32 times greater than the label recommendations. So therefore, there's definitely a need to develop rangeland strategies that not only suppress weeds, but help restore ecological function as a whole. So what can we do as land managers to help improve the state of invaded rangelands? So one thing we can alter is grazing management practices. Management intensive grazing, or MIG, involves grazing small paddocks at high stocking densities, then moving the animals into fresh rested pasture, oftentimes on a daily basis through the use of electric fencing developments. So in theory, this allows for more even forage use and the even distribution of manure, as well as plant recovery and regrowth post-grazing. Targeted grazing is a form of intensive management. However, here the duration, intensity, and season of grazing is altered in order to achieve specific land management objectives. So one being invasive plant management. It's a big conception in the literature that knapweed is unpalatable. This is due to its bitter tasting compound called semi-arid it contains. However, research has shown that sheep and goats will readily eat knapweed at all life stages, and previous clipping studies have shown a reduction in seed production of knapweed at the bud to early flowering stage. So this leads me into my research. So one component of my master's project was trying to determine the efficacy of targeted cattle grazing to suppress the invasive plant spotted knapweed, specifically looking at that seed bank. So my study site, my research plots were located in Drum Lake pasture, just east of Merritt, and this is approximately 45 minutes south of Kamloops. Our plots were located on Crown Range, where under the current range use plan, the pasture followed a spring-fall grazing rotation. So in early June, in odd years, they'd have 500 cow-calf pairs graze for 10 days, and the following year, it'd be grazed by 500 cow-calf pairs and 20 bulls in September, mid to late September for as well 10 days. The dominant vegetation at my site is Idaho fescue, blue bunch wheatgrass, lupin, yarrow, and also spotted knapweed. So I'll focus on the targeted grazing research for this presentation, but we established 50 by 50 meter electric fence enclosures, 2 enclosures for each treatment. The target enclosures were grazed in late July to early August to correspond with spotted knapweed's bud to early flowering stage. We also had our 2 control ungrazed enclosures. So within each enclosure, we had harvested 10 random biomass clippings and categorized these by functional group. So grasses, forbs, and our invasive plant, the spotted knapweed. And we also monitored the growth of 20 bolting or second-year knapweed plants per treatment enclosure over the growing season for a total of 80 plants. And we harvested these in September prior to seed dispersal. So I brought these plants back to the lab and then counted the number of mature seeds and seed heads on each plant. So here is the targeted grazing enclosure in the early bolting stage. So this is in early July. and the plants are getting ready to develop their buds. You can see in early August, the knapweed is in full flower and has now formed many buds. The targeted grazing treatment in 2020 was on August 6th. And then this is our enclosure post-grazing on August 10th. So I'll show us side by side. Here's a before and after. So you can definitely notice the reduction in flowers visually. However, we wanted to quantify this. So how much damage did the cattle have on the knapweed? So in 2020, we observed that 78% of the knapweed plants were grazed, so 31 out of 40, and an average of 17.2 centimeters of plant material by height was removed. We also saw a reduction of spotted knapweed biomass by 59%, whereas the utilization of the grasses was a little bit more conservative, so we had a moderate rate of 33%. And here is just an image of one of the grazed knapweed plants. You can see that none of the flowers or of the buds remained post-grazing. So in total, I counted just over 1,300 mature seeds in the control plants and 153 in the targeted plants. Keep in mind that some of those were ungrazed. Targeting spotted knapweed in early August significantly reduced the amount of mature seeds per plant, as well as the number of seed heads per plant by 88% and 79% respectively. So you can see the control in green, so the average number of seeds per plant, and then again, the average number of seed heads per plant. So another thing I want to look at was the forage nutrition value of the knapweed at the point of targeted grazing. So we harvested biomass prior to the targeted grazing trial, and we categorized this biomass and again into the graminoids, the grasses, and the spotted knapweed. We sent these to a lab to have a wet chemistry analysis conducted, and we found that spotted knapweed is a nutritious source of forage when grazed at that late July or early July time period compared to the grass community. So we found that contained a greater amount of crude protein and total digestible nutrients or net energy than the grasses, and the lower ADF and NDF values, which are measures of fiber, indicate that knapweed is also more easily digestible at this time. So I'm currently writing an integrated management chapter for my master's thesis. So I'm just in the thick of it right now. So I'm currently summarizing our research findings and the existing literature to provide recommendations for targeting spotted knapweed in invaded, particularly semi-arid rangelands. So this will hopefully provide ranchers with an alternative management tool to help control their knapweed, while also avoiding the overuse of herbicides and the large amount of labor it takes to apply something like manual or brush removal. So I'm expecting to finish my master's in spring 2022. So stay tuned for that document in the near future. So that being said, there are some challenges that come with practicing targeted grazing or other forms of intensive management. It can definitely be a little bit more labor intensive than more traditional or continuous graze systems where you let the cows out and do their thing. So animals will need to be monitored and moved in an efficient way on a regular basis, either through herding, nutrient supplements, or portable fencing developments and things like that. Another issue is water. So for my project, we had actually pumped the water up and also trucked water in for the animals to use during these grazing trials. So there definitely needs to be either permanent or portable water developments in place in each grazing paddock that you set up. There may also be a greater initial investment of income to purchase the necessary equipment to practice such grazing management, so that your water developments, fencing, nutrient supplements, and more. And this can make implementing such a practice a little bit more difficult on Crown Range, where there are limited options for fencing and such developments. So in terms of future directions and future research, there's a lot that could be done, but one thing that I'm really interested in is the knapweed seed viability post-cattle digestion. So one of the questions I get often is, are the cattle able to transfer and spread the seed after the grazing? So there has been some research conducted on dosing mature knapweed seeds to mule deer and sheep, where they fed a known number of mature knapweed seeds to the animals in with their pellet feed. They then recorded the percent recovery from their manure, and they recovered 11% from the mule deer and just 4% from the sheep. So these are mature knapweed seeds. There's currently no literature on spotted knapweed seeds and the digestive tract of cattle. So I think it would definitely be valuable to have field trials where cattle graze the knapweed at different life stages. So you would then hold them in a quarantine enclosure, collect their manure, and ensure there's no viable or mature knapweed seeds that were transferred. So thanks very much for listening. If you have any questions, please get in touch. My email's there. And I'd also like to thank the Society for Range Management for the opportunity to present today, and also our research partners.
Thanks, Kristi, for that great presentation. That was super interesting. It was funny. I was thinking, I was like, oh, what about post-digestion? And then all of a sudden the slide came up. I was like,
yeah.
So far, we don't have any chat questions yet, but I welcome anyone to unmute themselves, ask questions if they feel comfortable, or you can go ahead in the chat box. So I know one question I have right now is, I probably missed it, but what was the stocking rate of your targeted grazing plots?
So we had 10 cow-calf pairs for 1 day.
1 day, but they were 50 by 50, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's quite a moderate stocking rate for them.
Oh, that's awesome. So while we're waiting for, if we're going to have any questions.
Well, this is Gene Fultz from down in Vancouver, Washington. Very good presentation. Thank you. And the question I have would be, based upon the direction that you're seeing in your study, what would you advise as far as structuring the planning of a make-believe allotment that is kind of on the crown land that's just kind of going through an invasion like this? What type of recommendations would you make there? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for your question. So you're just asking, how would we see this integrated in a large scale? So something like Crown Range. I know Rachel Whitehouse, who gave a presentation previously, they did change the timing of their range use plan for some of their pastures to correspond it with that knapweed growth stage. So the bud to flowering stage. So that's one way you could integrate it in. It's very difficult to integrate into those larger scale plans. However, that's one way you could do it. It's just altering the season of use within these pastures and just aiming for that certain knapweed life stage. But then again, it gets a little bit complex, especially if different pastures are at different elevations. The knapweed flowering time can be different and things like that. So there is a lot to consider. Somewhere where I think this research would be applicable at a more manageable scale is if people have their own private ranches or small scale farms and things that do have a knapweed infestation, and then they might be able to target those areas and prioritize in that sense. Yeah, it is a big problem, but it takes a lot of work, and each site is very specific as well.
We have Haley Mankey asked a question in the chat box. She says, thanks for the informative presentation. And did you do any follow-up this summer to see if the density of knapweed plants was less in the treatment plot after the targeted grazing?
Yeah, so we weren't able to go back this summer, so 2021, but in previous years there, it will take multiple years in order to see that reduction in plant cover of knapweed. So we didn't see too many differences. We didn't see any significant differences between the plant cover a year post-grazing However, that's something that might take just multiple years and a longer study to start seeing those effects. But we do know from this study, we are seeing that reduction in the seed bank. So all invasive plant management, it's not a short-term solution. It's definitely a long-term project. So as long as we're seeing that reduction in the seed bank and that removal of the biomass over time, we should see those results. But then again, future research is needed for that.
We have Phil's asking, what forage supply taken into consideration within the plots? How did you determine cow-calf number and plot size?
Yeah, so this was actually already decided upon when I came onto the project, but they were using that same animal, similar animal numbers that was in the current range use plan. And then again, just for the pasture size, that was decided upon before I came onto the project, but that was just a manageable size to be implemented on a scale like this.
I have a knapweed infestation. I'm thinking now, like, maybe I can copy some of it for myself.
Definitely,
Yeah.
And I guess another question I've had in the past as well, whether or not the cows were trained previously, but they weren't introduced or they weren't conditioned to eat the knapweed. They were just contained in those enclosures and kind of just forced to eat it. So we were seeing them select the knapweed from our experiment.
That's good to know. So I'm going to, since we seem to have a quiet moment here, I'm going to do, oh, never mind. We have one more question. Do you have any thoughts about using a combination of herbicide and targeted grazing to treat areas?
Yeah, definitely. So this is a good question. So because we are doing that treatment in the summer, so late July, early August, with knapweed, we typically see that formation of the rosettes in the fall as well. So that little burst of growth. So I think it would definitely be useful if your knapweed population was very dense to come back in post-grazing that fall and do a follow-up patch. You could do a patch spray with a herbicide with that. And I think that would just help get rid of any of those rosettes. And that would help going into that next spring. So you wouldn't see as many of those bolting plants come up. So yeah, it's definitely good to use an integrated approach using those multiple tools in your toolbox there. You could also do some seeding as well in addition to that.
Yeah, this doesn't have to do with your presentation as much, but how effective is just straight hand pulling with this too? Like maybe you graze, and if they don't get it all, you go and hand pull and see what comes out.
Definitely. Yep. So you could use different forms. You could do hand pulling. If you have those manageable population sizes, I think that's another really useful tool to use as well, because then you can get that full taproot as well. With something, instead of just mowing, it has that opportunity to regrow as well that following year.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. We do have 5 minutes left, and so if there's any more questions, I will say them out to you, but I'm just going to put in a couple of plugs for our next presentation.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, yeah, thanks again so much, Kristi, for this presentation. It was really informative and really applicable to, I think a lot of people in the audience are dealing with the knapweed. So
definitely. Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and thanks for your questions. And
yeah, so next week we've got our, on November 9th on Tuesday, next Tuesday at 12, we're going to have Sarah Dixon-Hoyle at UBC doing a presentation on post-wildfire recovery of forest understory plant communities with particularly the Elephant Hill wildfire. This presentation will be on YouTube for you to view.